Welcome, beautiful people of all ages, shapes, and colors, to another episode of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, where we encourage you to stick to the basics. I'm one of your co-hosts, TV, aka TV on Basketball, alongside my co-host Jay, aka the Knockdown Jay. How's it going, my guy? It's been a
Man,
minute.
it has indeed been a minute, man. We had the whole entire All-Star break to kind of breathe, get back in the mix in terms of kind of like understanding the landscape of basketball. And then the WNBA decided to completely go off in the background as well. We've kind of been holding off on that one to see a couple more moves happen. A few have happened over the last couple of days. So I'm pretty excited to get into this episode because we've been sitting on a lot of information and sitting on even more opinions and reactions to a lot of the stuff that's been going on across both leagues. Now we finally get a chance to share, and I'm curious to see what you have to say, mainly about the WNBA. We're going to get to the All-Star weekend stuff a little bit later on, but the WNBA needs to get its respects because they had themselves quite a free agency period as well. Kind of got overshadowed by all the Luka Doncic stuff, so we had to get to it eventually.
100%. And we're going to be talking about the WNBA offseason, basically through, you know how offseason videos work, winners and losers. We're going to be talking about those very shortly. We're going to try and fix the All-Star weekend, Jay. I don't know if we can. They've been trying for years. Mostly Sunday night. Honestly, that's the biggest problem, which is Sunday night. We're going to try and talk that through. Some bold predictions maybe later on in the episode. And also there's some other news that we're going to touch on. It's going to be a very heavy episode because we haven't talked ball in what? Like 2 weeks?
Yeah.
It's been like almost 2 weeks since we talked. It's been like 2 weeks since we talked ball. So we're back. We're ready. Again, we have a lot of stuff coming up for you, and we have a big topic next week we're going to talk about because oh boy, it's been a while since we talked basketball, but there's a lot we do want to talk about. So be on the lookout for that. But Jay, we're going to get to this episode shortly. But before we do that, we have to talk about our socials. Make sure you follow our individual socials at TV on Basketball, at the Knockdown J. Those links can be found in the description down below. In terms of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, though, follow us on TikTok and Instagram for the best daily NBA content. That's where you get the picks. That's where you get the news. That's where you get some new series that are coming out pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that. All that stuff can be found on the TikTok. In terms of the podcast networks, make sure you subscribe and all that good stuff on the Spotify and Apple. We appreciate all you guys' support. Also, leave a review. And in terms of YouTube, remember to hit the notification bell so you will not miss an episode. You can find all video formats of our podcast there, as well as some awesome YouTube shorts. If you don't want to check those out on the Instagram and TikTok, you can also find them on the YouTube shorts. Jay, are you ready to get into this?
Yeah, bro. It's been a minute since we talked WNBA in very like significant detail. So this is one where we gotta cook a little bit, bro. We gotta sit down and really cook after seeing how free agency has went.
Jay, 100%. And we're going to start off with the WNBA winners and losers. And there's so many moves that happened, but I think this is the best way to kind of encapsulate all of that. And I'm going to throw it over to you, Jay, to start off with. Who is your biggest winner from the WNBA offseason thus far?
Oh, you already know. My favorite player in the entire W is Satu Sabali, right? So she goes to the Phoenix Mercury. They get better significantly over the offseason just with that alone. Also being able to get Alyssa Thomas, the GOAT in terms of being a floor general. Obviously, losing Brittany Griner is kind of huge from a defensive standpoint, right? But offensively, they take a significant step in the right direction. This is one where this is a team that really lacked depth in a real way. And with the fact that they were a team that was at the top of the list for DeWanna Bonner at one point, the fact that they were still able to come out with two players in Alyssa Thomas and Satu Sabali in the process, I think was huge for the offensive side of the ball. This is a team that's going to come out swinging, and I think it's a team that is going to be pretty proud of what they're able to do on that side of the ball, especially given the fact that even though she's probably not the happiest about it, they still have Marina Mabry on this team. I know she put in a request for a trade, but
and they got denied.
It got denied, very much denied. And I completely understand why, because she fits very well with what this team is trying to do on that side of the ball, right? Offensively, they want to be able to spread the floor. They want to be able to shoot threes at a high clip. Alyssa Thomas as a distributor and a floor general overall in terms of being able to get them organized in the offense with these kind of talents, I think is huge. I think a low-key, like quiet pickup is Sammy Whitcomb, who's going to be another player who really contributes for them. I think this is a team that when you add these two all-star caliber / all WNBA caliber players in Sabali and Thomas, along with a Kalia Copper, who I told you last year was like dark horse MVP level for most of the season, going into the playoffs, this is a team that really goes into this next season with real offensive firepower, actual depth, and the ability to shoot the ball at a high level. This is a team that clearly wanted to get better in a real way this offseason. And although they didn't get the 2-for-1 special that we thought we were going to get when we saw that Alyssa Thomas signed, we definitely thought Bonner was next. Even though they didn't get that, I think they got the next best thing they could have gotten in terms of getting a 1-2 punch at the point guard and wing spot.
No, 100%. They got like some of the biggest names out there in the offseason. We talked about it even like in episodes before about where Satou Sabally is going to end up being. She ends up on the Phoenix Mercury, and Jay, dare I say it, 3 top 20, top 15 players in the league possibly on that team.
And they're very familiar with having these kind of big three organized and in the front court / back court area as well. This is not the first time the Mercury have been able to sit down and put together a big three. This just might interestingly be one of their better ones, though. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah, honestly, I thought this offseason, I still worry about their depth a little bit. They did give up a few of those like big time names. Obviously, you had to trade away Sophie Cunningham. You let go of Rebecca Allen, Natasha Cloud. These girls were all traded away.
Yeah.
But and also of course like they're like one of their franchise cornerstone pieces in Brittany Griner as well. You lost all those players, but then you bring in. You go a bit younger with Satou, but also get a perennial MVP candidate in Alyssa Thomas. Great moves from them. I honestly thought that this was enough to bring back Diana Taurasi for at least one more year to kind of see how like all these things like play out. Unfortunately, she did retire. We're going to go into that maybe a bit later on the podcast. But honestly, I'm a big fan of their ceiling so far. A lot is riding on the health of Satou Sabally. Which is big because she missed a lot of last season, if not all of did she miss like I think like all
she missed practically all of the entire season until like the last 10 games. She missed a good majority of the year. But the Diana Taurasi news actually further emphasized the impact of how good it is that they were able to at least get Alyssa Thomas this summer. Like that's another steady hand and a very dominant force at that point guard position that, let's be honest, at the end of the day, Diana was slowing down significantly, especially as a scoring option for the Mercury. This gives them another option at that point guard spot to be able to not only put the ball in the basket, but again, still be a steady hand at the top of the key to get everybody organized. Because again, if we go down the list of the offensive talent they do have, when you pair in Sammy Whitcomb, when you throw in Satou Sabally, when you add in the fact that you still have Kalia Copper, you go down the list of the kind of offensive threats they have on this team, you need somebody to be able to organize this. Unironically, TV, Alyssa kind of comes off as, and obviously she's a significantly better player than this, right? But she comes off as the same kind of archetype that the Phoenix Suns in the NBA were looking for at the point guard spot to kind of get everything settled when it came to the Kevin Durant and Devin Booker element. Now, obviously, they didn't do a great job of that when they went after Bradley Beal, but they tried to follow that up by getting my boy and getting Tyus Jones. Now, obviously, again, Alyssa Thomas, significantly better player than getting Tyus, who I love as an individual.
Yeah.
Right, but not nearly as proven as Alyssa, obviously. But I'm talking about the archetype of a player that is a high-level ball reader, somebody who can be able to position everybody in a way that gets them the ball in the places that they need it and just run efficient offense. It's the same reason why, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the reasons why Chris Paul was still in negotiation to even maybe potentially stay with the Phoenix Suns at the time, was because of the idea that it seemed like he could be that steady hand. This is kind of a similar element for the Mercury. I think that the best part about it, though, is the offensive weapons they have are all portable. All of the offensive weapons around her are all players that I think can play multiple positions, and that makes it even easier on her to be able to move up and down the lineup, because we know she's also a very high-level rebounder for her size. Like, she's one of the best Rondo for this team.
She's one of the best players in the league too, which is massive.
Yeah, I mean, she pretty much. Alyssa Thomas comes onto the Phoenix Mercury, essentially acting as the Rajon Rondo of the Big Three era for the Boston Celtics. That's kind of what it looks like.
Draymond Green, or the Draymond Green of like the Prime Warriors. Yeah,
Draymond Green might even be another good analogy. I think obviously the biggest difference is how much she's going to have the ball in her hands. But I think the IQ and ability to create offense around her without having to be highly dependent, I think that's the biggest separator. That's maybe why I lean Rondo a little bit more, because when you needed Rondo to go score, he could get into his Duffy a little bit in a way that some people didn't give him credit for back then.
Hey, shout out to Draymond. I mean, 34 points in the freaking Game 7 of the finals.
Right.
I'm not going to let people forget that. Now, he was the best player for the Warriors that game. But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a strong offseason for Phoenix, though. I think this is one of those where, obviously, you can't call it underrated, but I think this was more of an offensive-heavy move, very similar to their NBA counterparts, but I think that these puzzle pieces fit much, much better. The biggest question I have, especially with losing Brittany Griner, is just being able to shore up that middle. The defense does get a little tricky now that they seem like they've leaned very much into more of a 5-out scheme. It'll be interesting to see how they defend this year.
Yeah, this is why they need to keep. This is why, like, they denied Marina Mabry's request. They need shooting on this team, bro, and especially someone off ball who doesn't need the ball at all times, because you know this ball is going to be in the hands of Sabali and Thomas' hands and Kalia Cooper's hands. Someone who could just move around the perimeter and just get open for that wide open three. You need a Marina Mabry in that team. I think they had a great offseason, 100%. Yeah. Jay, here's my first winner, and I know we talked about this team a lot. It's the most talked about team in all the WNBA, but they were definitely was in the offseason. The Indiana Fever. Yeah. They definitely won this offseason.
Yeah.
And look, man, people have been saying no one wants to deal with the Caitlin Clark drama, and people don't want to come over to the Fever. They just freaking signed DeWanna Bonner. They brought in Natasha Howard, Sophie Cunningham, and Sydney Colson. Yes, they did lose a couple people. You know, Melissa Smith, Erica Wheeler as the most, notable names over there. But man, they are not going slow with this rebuild. They are trying. Not only are they accelerating the rebuild, they're finally getting veterans on this team to kind of, like how we talked about during the regular season, where they didn't have kind of that enforcer on that Indiana Fever team to help, protect the Caitlin Clark of whenever she was getting pushed around. One of the people that was pushing her around is now on her team.
I was gonna say the enemy of your enemy is my friend. They position themselves.
Yeah, the new coach definitely helps. A lot of like DeWanna Bonner definitely has a clear connection with the coach there. But man, you got the experience you need. You got a bit deeper, and the thing is, you still have all of your key players. You still have you still have some your best players on your team, including Caitlin Clark and all that. So this team has gone a lot better. They've gotten older, and I think this team, more now than ever than they have over the past decade, is ready to make a deep playoff run. I really like the offseason that they put together.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for the Fever, like you mentioned beforehand, is starting to establish an identity. I think that's the most important thing for a young roster that went 3 straight seasons at the top of the lottery. This is one of those things where you look at a team, and when you're that kind of squad, the Pistons are a great example of this in NBA terms. And we're going to do this a lot, by the way, guys, because the best way for us to assimilate WNBA content is by making sure that we kind of put it together with the stuff that we know best. So these analogies are not necessarily to compare them on a literal level, but it's just to help you guys get a better understanding for people who are more in tune with the NBA of what we mean from a WNBA standpoint. This is a team in the Indiana Fever that is looking to take the last 3 years of mediocrity and start to really position themselves in a real way. The Detroit Pistons are a very good example of this, as a team that the last couple of years have been very wonky, and last year in particular was very much one of those seasons that was you have to really look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, are you trying to be competitive, or are you simply trying to put butts in seats, right? This year, and the way they treated the offseason, going after a Malik Beasley, getting Tobias Harris,
Tim Hardaway Jr.
Jaden Ivey. Tim Hardaway Jr. has sneakily been a very solid player for them this year, right? Going after guys that fit a veteran role that also fit the skill set of your main player, your best player in Cade Cunningham, by giving him spacing, something he hasn't had even dating back to college with Oklahoma State. You give him that space, and what does he do with the first year you give him legit spacing? All-Star game. All-Star game. First year you give Cade Cunningham legitimate spacing, we're no longer comparing him to LaMelo Ball in the sense of him being a player that can't play winning basketball, right? That's the biggest discrepancy. That's one of the biggest debates last year was, is Cade Cunningham maybe not as flashy, right? But in terms of his overall productivity, is he a winning basketball player at the jumbo guard spot, right? You put legitimate spacing around him, and although the Detroit Pistons are obviously not some top 5 team in the Eastern Conference or anything, they are much more competent. They are much more competent than they were last year, are they not, TV?
Yes. 100%.
So now you look at it from the perspective of the Indiana Fever, right? You obviously have to add on what you saw last year with Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell, one of the best, if not the best, backcourt tandem last year. I wouldn't say they were the best, but I think they were definitely in conversation. I think we both can agree that they were both in conversation as one of the best duos in the backcourt last season. You add that to a Aaliyah Boston. You have Sophie Cunningham now. You put yourself in the position now with the double and triple forward lineups with a Brianna Turner. You obviously mentioned beforehand that you have DeWanna Bonner. You have yourself in a real position now where you establish an identity that mirrors a defensive mindset around your offensive engine. It's very James Harden-y in a sense, right? You don't need, and DeWanna Bonner is a good isolation shot creator, right? Similar to how Chris Paul was a very good Robin isolation shot creator next to James Harden.
Same thing with Kelsey, yeah.
Same thing with Kelsey, and Kelsey can act as that as well. What was the similar thing that was built with the Houston Rockets during that time frame when James Harden was at his peak? You put three-point shooting and defense around him as the centerpiece as an offensive hub, and you finally gave him a secondary shot creator, whether it was Chris Paul, whether it was Russell Westbrook once upon a time as well, right? And they were very successful in that. When you do that now with Caitlin Clark, with a Kelsey Mitchell, and a DeWanna Bonner as two offensive engines that can act next to her, not only do you take the pressure off of her offensively, but now you have real flexibility knowing that you can guard behind her on the other side of the ball. This was perfect roster construction. Again, another team that's a little soft in the middle still a little soft in the middle when it comes to rim protection, but I think that they have an identity that I think fits the mold of what you need to do around your superstar phenom second-year player. Like, this is going to be a big season for them.
Yeah, I really hope that Aaliyah Boston really focuses on their defense in the offseason because
that'll be huge.
That would be absolutely massive and kind of because like she definitely was expecting more of an offensive role when being put onto this team. But man, when you have like a generational talent like Caitlin Clark, you got like. It's all about filling up the holes at this point. Like, I don't think even the Fever expected to be this good coming off of Caitlin Clark rookie season. They're like, oh, wait, now it's time for us to actually be proactive instead of reactive because we want to make sure that, one, we take advantage of her rookie contract before we have to start paying her more money, but also we want to make sure that the pieces that we have around her fit because like she was able to play well with Kelsey beside her, which was a question going into the rookie season. Aaliyah Boston was still able to get some of hers, but in order for them to move forward, they have to kind of fill up the holes. And I think Aaliyah Boston, in terms of like her skill set, she's a very good player. She needs to work on the defensive, in order for this team to have long-term success. But I'm a huge fan of their offseason. Excited to see which direction they to see how much they improve. And I'm just glad they finally have some. I won't say protection for Caitlin Clark, but they have freaking some dogs now on that team.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, man. Establishing an enforcer next to Caitlin is one of the most important things because I feel like last year, everything with the little individual beefs and media narrative drove to a direction where we looked away from the most important thing outside of her talent, which is how they grow moving forward around her. Because one of the things that got lost in all the narrative around Caitlin last year was the fact that Kelsey Mitchell was really their only other consistent scorer last year.
Yes.
That got lost in the sauce. Like
I was gonna say both, and the thing is, by the end of the season, both were dead tired, man. Both were dead tired.
You could tell that there was a carry job, and they most definitely not only needed to become more competitive on the defensive end, but they needed another isolation score to be able to take some of that pressure off. Ironically, DeWanna Bonner covers both bases for that.
Yes.
And again, the enemy of your enemy is my friend. Hilariously enough, you look at the Connecticut Sun, a team that took a step back this year, obviously, given the fact that their entire starting five is on a different roster now. But you look at what they were able to do to Caitlin Clark last year defensively. Now you take one of the biggest culprits for that and you put her next to her. Now you put her in a position where you're like, look, thanks, Connecticut Sun. You just helped me out because now one of the biggest adversaries that kind of put me in a tough position last season in terms of showing off my offensive prowess, that's one less hurdle I got to jump over, right?
100%, yeah.
And that changes things for Indiana a lot because that also takes the pressure off of Caitlin to understand that, that's one all WNBA caliber defender off the list on a night-to-night basis.
Yeah, I'm super excited for what the team has to offer, and they got a lot better this offseason, which is great for them. Jay, who's your next winner?
So my next one, I didn't want to go with anybody super obvious. So the team that I'm actually going to go with is, unironically, the team that Satu Sabali went from, which is the Dallas Wings. They were able to come out of this offseason getting significant talent upgrade, not having to give up the first overall pick, and actually establishing another first round pick. If I'm not mistaken, they were able to get it in
the third overall pick. Yeah, the Ariel Atkins trade.
Yeah, okay, so it was the most recent. Okay, so yeah, so it was actually the most recent trade. So now they have 2 picks in the first round. Obviously, the first overall pick being the most significant.
It's Paige Beckers.
And I'm interested to see how that goes because I think we believe that it's Paige, and it's not that I think the talent discrepancy is that, but I've been hearing different things saying there might be a change of heart in terms of her coming out. I'm not sure exactly how much weight that has because obviously there's a lot of different things that go around when you start talking about the NIL contributions to all of this stuff as well. If Paige were to not come out, Olivia Miles out of Notre Dame would definitely be one of the next best picks to get at the guard position. But I think let's talk about the actual offseason itself. Getting Dejanay Carrington specifically, one of my favorite players, TV, the player that on this podcast I said was the most improved player of the year and ended up getting it as deserved. Comes in as one of the best perimeter guards defensively in the league to a team that was dead last in defensive rating last year, a team that desperately needed an identity on that side of the ball, as a team that was so dependent on just getting buckets from Arike Agumawale that it was pretty much Agumawale or bust offensively because Satu was out most of the year, and they weren't guarding to save their life for the most part. So now, let's say they draft Paige at number 1. They have a pick at 12, which there's a couple of interesting ways they can go with that one, especially because the forward class is pretty interesting this year. There's a couple of different options they can go there. Dejanay is huge. I think also getting Nalissa Smith as a front court player, it gives them another down low scorer. There's a lot of different things that help this team where they just have new life. Right? This was a team that desperately after last year needed a breath of fresh air. It's kind of comparative to the Detroit Pistons of last year to this season in a way. And I don't know if that'd be nearly as successful, but I do think that the Dallas Wings will be much more, they'll be much more exciting to watch next year as a team, a much more competitive team next year with the moves that they made this season, this offseason, excuse me. This team desperately needed new life in a real way, and they got an influx of talent that all bring them this level of okay, I think this team is watchable now. Versus last year, it felt like everything in his mama was going wrong, from injury concerns to the lack of defense to the fact that they were so dependent on Arike to score the basketball at a high level, and she became damn near inefficient shot chucker level. And it wasn't her fault. She's always been a high volume scorer, but it kind of started getting to the point of being it started getting almost unrealistically disrespectful to ask her to do that on a night-to-night basis. And so now there's a new vibe around, kind of like what Phoenix did, what the Phoenix Mercury did this past offseason, to kind of get a new invigoration by grabbing some players that just are hungry and coming with a different vibe.
100%. I think that this is a great offseason for them as well. I think they realize that they're really trying to go for this this nice youth movement that they got going on. So they're kind of instead of being reactive and seeing how this team works, they're being proactive as to what they can envision this team being. So making these moves in order to kind of improve their team right away is absolutely fantastic. Compared to a team like the Mystics, who didn't have a great season last year and didn't really make any moves, this is a team who has a number 1 pick, know that they want to start competing soon, so they wanted to already have a change of guard already with their team, and also again, like you mentioned, help out Arike, man. This girl was chucking it up every chance she got. Again, because she had to, she had to at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dejanay Carrington being a great add to the team, still fitting with that young core and in the same timeline as the rest of the team. I think it's a great offseason for them as well. I'm excited, especially if Paige Beckers does end up actually choosing to go into this draft. This Dallas Wings team could maybe make that Indiana Fever type of resurgence they from last year as well.
I'm very excited to see what this team does.
Yeah.
They have a chance
They
to.
can have a big jump. What do I mean by that is like they can have a big jump in terms of like wins. There's a chance.
They have a chance to be what Indiana was last year in a way
Yeah,
that
that's what I'm
makes
saying.
them just
That's it.
very competitive. And even if they don't make the postseason the way Indiana did, for example, they're
Yeah.
gonna be a team that like you're not gonna just be able to check the box like, yep, easy pickings. Like they're a team that's going to be very competitive, and you're going to have to be very aware because the backcourt alone of Enrique and Page is insane. And if they go with a 3 guard lineup where they throw Dejounte in there, that's no slouch in terms of the spacing, along with the fact that this is a team that can play fast. They can play very much more in transition, and it makes them a team that you have to be careful about because they're going to be playing with a style that might maybe be a little unconventional, but may give them an edge in a real way because they're playing in a way that is just more conducive to scoring the basketball while having at least a little bit more defensive edge than what they've been used to over the last couple of years, actually.
Yeah, 100%. I'm excited to see how this team goes. And again, it's a they have 2 top 3 picks, so you already know they're gonna have some two like high end prospects coming onto this team. So this team could definitely make some noise going into next season. Jay, my other winner for this, the LA Sparks. I think the LA Sparks are winners of this deadline, and I think them bringing in Kelsey Plum, man. You have to remember, last year they struggled on the offensive end. This LA Sparks team, a lot of the offensive was put onto Dearica Hamby. Rickea Jackson started off a bit slow, but she picked it up as the season went on. Obviously, also Cameron Brink missed a lot of the season because of a ACL injury, so it wasn't the most ideal season. But you could tell that there was a lot of promise with this team. They make a trade for a true number one option, a former WNBA champion, someone that can really we talk about bigs, man, all the time. They really need that guard to really help them develop well, and having Kelsey Plum in there, like a former MVP candidate, not only will help the Sparks try and break that 5-year playoff drought that they've had, but also just help out with the development of Rickea and Cameron Brink. I think having them on the team will just help improve their development as a whole in general. Yes, they had to lose Lexi Brown. Yes, they lost Kia Nurse, but they got probably the most sought after player in this offseason, which was Kelsey Plum, which we knew that she was going to end up leaving Las Vegas anyway. But adding her to the team, I think helps out the Sparks overall and makes them a lot more of an interesting team going forward.
Yeah, I think the Sparks have put themselves in a real position where, again, they want to take a step forward. There were a lot of teams that got better just simply with small veteran moves. This was one where they swung for the fences in a real way and got one of the top free agents on the board in terms of a team, or not necessarily free agents with the way that her acquisition,
Yes,
but a player that they got her through trade. But this was one of the hotter names to come up in conversation, especially once the Jewel Lloyd stuff came up. The biggest question was who would be the other star on the opposite side of that, because obviously you would want to get some relative version of compensation, and Jewel Lloyd wanting out makes it where you're gonna have to give a pretty good offer. Kelsey Plum even being on the table was interesting in its own right, but I think it's one of those things where you look at the Sparks and you look at what they had the potential to do last year. You look at how solid Rickea Jackson in particular was. Yes. She was a rookie that was quietly more productive than given credit for. Because the Sparks were just not that good.
She was the clear number 3. She was the clear number 3 in terms of
clear number 3, just not discussed as much, especially because once Cameron Brink went down, the race around Rookie of the Year kind of came down to 2.
Yeah.
But Cameron Brink was very much solidified in that conversation at the beginning of the year as well before everything went down. One of the league leaders in blocks, block percentage, one of the best rim protectors in the league out the gate. That's things that they can build on next year that we got a glimpse of. Now you have another or a main offensive engine to play through, something that I think the Sparks really didn't have like great consistency at last year. Yeah. Now you have that go-to player to lean on. I think there's a real world now where this team, and it all depends on what their next move is with the draft in particular, but I think they're still 1 or 2 players away from being like a real menace But I think that this is the big swing that if you're a Sparks team looking to take that next step, this is the kind of player you go after, where you also bring in a culture, you bring in a certain level of confidence. That's one of the biggest things with Kelsey Plum that you can rely on, is a player that plays with a high level of like, we are a high level team as long as we feel as long as we consider ourselves as such. She plays with a certain kind of competitive fervor that I think the Sparks desperately need. And there's a culture brewing in LA that I think is slowly burning, and I think we're a season away from it really being on fire in terms of like them being a team. We got to start to put even more respect on for real.
I think this puts them like a year away. I think that's the best way to say it. Like, you have to wait for things to kind of like even out and to let things settle. But I think this is a team that's like a year away to like people looking at them saying, "Oh wait, this team is a dark horse potentially," especially with the development of Rakia, the development of Cameron Brink. Hopefully Cameron Brink gets to play for the majority of this season. And now they got the number one option, Kelsey Plum, especially at the guard position, which they were definitely lacking in. Makes this team a lot. And then look, I know Kelsey Plum wasn't at her best last year. She wasn't like playing like she did the years where the Aces won the championship. But she finished top 3 MVP in the 2022 season. If now that she has a bit more of a responsibility, now that she has a defense behind her, can she reach back to that level? I think there's a chance.
It's going to be an interesting season for the Sparks because we have to look at them in the lights of the Indianas, the Dallases, the even Chicago, honestly, another team that got better in a quiet way this offseason, right? Yes. As like a team that like, okay, you got yourself a big hitter now next to some players that you saw were highly productive last season when they were healthy, more specifically speaking of Cameron Brink in that regard. Now, what do you look like if you have a healthy Cameron Brink in her second season? You have Rakia Jackson in her second year coming off of a very strong rookie campaign. Like that now what are you capable of when you add that heavy hitter who can be a leader in the locker room for your squad in a way that I'm not going to say they didn't have last season, but I think this voice gets a little bit louder given the fact that you're talking about a former two-time champion, a player that comes with a real edge to her as a player that, you know, is always going to be the top of the leaderboards in terms of scoring at the guard position and just gives you a real dynamic on that side of the ball as a player like, you know, you can close games like with the ball in her hands.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm excited again. If Kevin Brink is healthy, if like all these guys, if this team ends up staying healthy, there's gonna be a very fun team to watch. Again, might not make the playoffs, but it will still be a very fun team to watch. Yeah. Jay, we've been very positive, but it's time to go to the losers here. Who do you have as the loser of the WNBA offseason?
Yeah, so my one loser is unfortunately my Washington Mystics, right? I mean, the local squad for me didn't make a single real play. It's
not a single like significant move at all.
Like, not literally. At all. I mean, in an offseason that seemed like people were willing to wheel and deal, they've got money to blow. Like, that's the weird thing. And if they're going to go into a reset, commit to it. I mean, Brittany Sykes is still on this team. Carly Samuelson is still on this team. I like Shakira Austin. I think she should stay, but I think Stephanie Dolson, is another player. Like, if you're talking about doing a reset, you have like 3 or 4 like veteran players that could be like real assets in the trade market. And it's like, did you not pick up the phone or did you not pull out the phone to make the phone call? Like, yeah. Unfortunately, the Mystics are giving off vibes of another team that I'm very fond of in the Chicago Bulls, and a team that just seems like they do not have a real direction in mind. And even if it seems like they have a direction, they don't feel committed to it in a way that seems like they're willing to do the things that are necessary in order to take that step to follow that path. The Chicago Bulls feel like a team that's waiting to just be the 10th seed and lose in the first round of the play-in tournament just to retain their pick, even though they could have just lost out. They could just lose out and get a higher pick in the NBA draft, right? The Mystics seem like the type of team that with Aaliyah Edwards not having guaranteed money, going into the I don't think it's this season, I think it's the following season, and them having significant cap space, they have 3 or 4 veteran players that they could have used to get real draft capital this summer in what is going to be a pretty loaded 2025 class, by the way, and even 2026 has a very strong class behind it as well, and you don't do anything? You don't do anything.
Yeah.
Anything. This is like the Bulls trading Zach LaVine and saying, oh, okay, trade deadline done. Vooch is still on this team.
Yeah.
Lonzo Ball is still on this team. You know what I'm saying? You go down the list and you ask yourself, so are you rebuilding or not? Because if you're retooling, you're not good enough. And if you're rebuilding, you don't have the assets that show that you plan on doing anything anytime soon. And that makes me worry for Washington because that puts them in a real purgatory as a team that I like Aaliyah Edwards. I like Shakira Austin. She's one of my favorite players in the league right now as well. Emily Engstler, she's not like high status in terms of her ability so far in the league, but she has high defensive upside, and this defensive identity that the Washington Mystics tried to establish last season, she's a very good fit within that. They have foundational pieces within their last couple of drafts that make you feel like, okay, if you wanted to rebuild, you can do so with a few of these like, you know, up and coming pieces. But if you're going to do it, commit to them. Let them know that they are the future of the roster. They are the future of what kind of franchise you're trying to work yourself back into. And when you pair all of this unfortunate circumstance around the fact that they did a complete front office overhaul, it just gives off dysfunction.
Yeah, it's. I know it hurts you to put them in the same boat as your Bulls, man.
It does.
And then I love Aaliyah Edwards. Freaking Canadian herself. She freaking, like, if you guys watched Unrivaled, she freaking 11-0'd. What was it? I think Breonna Stewart, was it? She freaking 11-0'd her. Want her to succeed. She, like, especially as a former number 1 overall pick, we want to see Aaliyah Edwards do well. Yeah. But to see the Mystics amongst the mess that is this offseason, this craziness that's happened this offseason, to see them do nothing, it's just like it feels negligent.
Yes.
It feels negligent of the roster. I know that they ended up last year strong. They made a little push towards the playoffs. I remember that. But at the same time, man, like we tear down teams in the NBA like the Magic in the past days, like the Toronto Raptors a couple years ago, like the Chicago Bulls. You want to be choosing a direction, and when you have all these teams, okay, either going fully rebuild if you were the Dallas Wings and you have the 1st and 3rd overall picks to try and move forward with it, or if you're trying to go all in, like you see, like what the Indiana Fever are doing right now, you can't be just in the middle of the pack. That's just not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing the Mystics like in the midst of all of these teams making moves, it's kind of disappointing to see, especially because you do have like some like good pieces there over there in Washington. So you'd like to see something, maybe stuff changes after draft, after the post draft, but at the same time, man, to see them just do absolutely nothing just feels like you're waiting for like something to come your way instead of actually being proactive.
I think the one saving grace for Washington, specifically this year, is they at least have 3 picks within the first 6 in the first round. In a draft class that is pretty loaded, especially at the top. Even with some of the players that have already kind of made themselves seem like they're pulling out, like Lauren Betts for UCLA, sounds like she plans on coming back another year, for example. Like there is still significant talent at the top worth having a real conversation about. Could Olivia Miles fall to 3 and go to DC there? Could you get a Sidonia Prince from TCU somewhere at 4 or 6, right? The saving grace will be how well do they draft this year, given the fact that they do have 3 picks in the first round of this year's class, in a class that is very stacked, even with some of the names that we've seen kind of already kind of float out the possibility of not not stepping into eligibility for the draft this year and returning back to school. There's still a very not top heavy, but a very deep and a diverse class where they have a couple of different talents they can swing at. Having 3 of the top 6 picks gives them a chance to still make up for this quiet offseason, but it still just gives off dysfunction, TV. So it's a saving grace, but it takes your offseason from like a D- to like a C+. Unless like an Olivia Miles from Notre Dame falls to 3. Then you kind of are really cooking with grease.
Yeah, 100%. You just especially like again, like we mentioned, there was just moves all over the place, whether it was GM changes, whether it's coaching changes, where it's like the roster's changing. Like everyone feels like they are adapting to what's going on, and they're just kind of just they're just waiting, which is kind of like the place that you don't want to be. You don't want to be stagnant. That's what we're trying to point at here. But they made the moves. They finally moved off of Ariel Atkins as well, so I guess that's something that they should have kind of moved into one direction. But like you said, go all in, guys. Go all in if you're gonna try and pick one direction. Jay, my loser for the trade deadline. I hate to say it, but the Las Vegas Aces. It's one of those things where it's like, I mean, I'm gonna quote Asia Wilson here, where she basically said, "Where is everyone?" She tweeted the other day, "Where is everyone?" Because they got rid of so much of the team. Yes, they brought in Jewel Lloyd. Yes, Tiffany Mitchell's on the team, Cheyenne Parker, Tyus. But they lost Alicia Clark, Tiffany Hayes, who they freaking brought out of retirement to try and play for their team. Kate Martin, they lost to the Valkyries. And they lost one of the best guards in the league in Kelsey Plum. I don't think that the Aces took like a huge step back, but when you're like the Aces and you're this like kind of this franchise that wants to compete for a championship every year, you got the best player in the world in Asia Wilson. You want to be kind of keeping up with what the Lynx are doing, what the Liberty is, and you want to continue to compete that way. Where I feel like the Aces here kind of took a little bit of a step back. I think Jewel Lloyd is again better than nothing because it was kind of like inevitable that Kelsey Plum was leaving. She kind of like she's been hitting at it all season, but like they've lost like veteran role players which are really important, and then Kate Martin, who showed a few flashes last year, that could be a future rotation player. She ended up going to the expansion team. So the Aces, a team that's usually aggressive in these sort of situations, kind of took a step back in my opinion.
I mean, it's not even just like an opinion, it's a fact, TV. This is one of the proven points of why it's so hard to three-peat and be a multi-time champion, is because the question is not necessarily how good you are. It's, can your talent stand the test of time? And that's not always due to health. Sometimes that's down to things like this. The WNBA is the biggest revolving door in terms of players changing teams on a significant basis, because since the roster pool is so small, things are likely to change in a real way where, just in one offseason. I mean, we saw with the Connecticut Sun, and they did a pretty good job of recouping the best they could, but I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, their entire starting five is going to be different next year. After being a team that we were talking about as a real championship contender this past season, their whole team is new faces across the board, right? Yes. So it goes to show you just how difficult it is to be a championship caliber team season in and season out, because it doesn't always come down to whether or not you're just the healthiest team at the end of the day or whether or not you're just that talented. Sometimes it comes down to, can you keep the Beatles together? Can you keep the band together long enough to make multiple runs after runs? And Las Vegas, they ran their race. They thankfully were able to get two in the most recent, 3 to 4 year stretch that they've been really, really in the mix. And now we have to see how they're able to survive this lull period where things are going to be very different. And I think their expectations for next season, at least from the outside, are going to change. I think people do feel like they're much more vulnerable than they've ever been. And rightfully so, given the roster's current state, where it looks like there's not the same level of stability that we've seen them be so accustomed to lately.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's one of those things where it's like winning cures everything. So maybe there's been stuff that's kind of like building the last few years, which have like led to some of their players leaving, like wanting to go out, especially like Kelsey Plum, especially this past season where there's been kind of an eye and like kind of a criticism on the Las Vegas Aces more than ever as well. So I guess it was bound to happen, especially because Asia Wilson's already taking up a big part of the payroll. You have like a lot of players like coming in and out, like you mentioned, the WNBA. People change teams all the time. It's hard for them to catch up, but I think going into the season, they want to still be contenders, and they still got their players. They still got Chelsea Gray. They obviously have Jewel Lloyd still on the team, but it just doesn't seem like the top tier Aces that we're accustomed to.
Seems like a team that with the Jewel Lloyd trade just wanted to try to stay afloat, given the fact that Kelsey Plum is a significant talent for their team. We also have to remember, because you have to look back at the way last season went, TV. Remember, we were talking about this on the podcast. Very top heavy in terms of the scoring distribution last year. Very top heavy.
You're telling
with
me.
Kelsey Plum, being a big contributor of that. It's not just going to be that, it's not going to just be that Jewel Lloyd has to fill those shoes from a roster perspective. What will her offensive output be next year? We know that she can be a dynamo when it comes to putting the ball in the basket, but this is an Aces team that clearly is going to need it, given that just last year they were showing signs of almost being more of an offensive conundrum than we're used to. Still one of the best defensive teams in the league last year. Don't get it twisted. Yeah. But on offense, not nearly as dominant, not nearly as diverse as we're used to. I think that's one of those things that is like slowly but surely kind of like falling on deaf ears. And I feel like that should be taken into account. By the way, I wanted to say something in passing about one of your winners just because we almost forgot to mention it. Okay. De'Erica Hamby, also former teammate of Kelsey Plum on that Los Angeles Sparks team. Was an all-star caliber player last season and gets to build on top of that next to Cameron Brink with her old running mate in the back in their backcourt. That 1-2 punch, very familiar with each other. Also, two players that could be real dangerous when we start talking about dynamic duos next year.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, those are our winners and losers of the WNBA offseason. Let us hear your thoughts down below. There's definitely some that we're missing. Again, there were a lot of massive trades that happened, and also a lot of like huge free agent signings. So let us know what you guys think. You know what? To rock the front, the freaking Toronto Temple. So have you seen the video from a couple weeks ago where I finally got the merch? Honestly, quickly speaking on the Valkyries, they didn't really do much in terms of free agency moves, but at least for the, I don't know if that's gonna mirror the same for the Toronto Temple, but who knows? But all I'm saying is, I know like the Chicago Sky signed our girl Kia Nurse, 1-year deal. Hopefully she can join the Toronto Temple in the inaugural season. Who knows if that happens? But again, let us know down below what you guys think. Who are some of your winners and losers? Jay, moving on to the next topic, and we're gonna talk about All-Star Weekend. And I don't want to talk about the weekend really in of itself because one, what are the highlights of this? One, did Mac McClung all-time dunk contest performance? Can't even hate. That was one of the better dunk contest performances, especially over the last few years. I argue top 5 dunk contest performance of all time. So that's how good he did. He carried that competition. But the talking points coming out of the after the All-Star weekend was the All-Star Sunday, Jay, the All-Star game itself. And they tried to fix it with having these 4 teams trying to do a tournament style, but it just went so sideways. We only had 40 minutes of basketball in a 3-hour broadcast. We had a horrible finals. We had just so much random stuff happening in between games. Jay, it felt more like a spectacle than it was an actual basketball game. But my question to you here, Jay, and this is the biggest talking point, because All-Star Weekend, we could talk about it, but it's usually the same stuff over and over again. Again, shout out to Matt McClung. But can this All-Star Weekend be fixed? Most specifically, the All-Star Sunday. Because I feel like with All-Star Saturday, you know what you're getting from the 3-point contest. That's the most consistent event you got. The dunk contest will go with its ebbs and flows. There's going to be a good year. There's going to be a bad year. You're just going to have to live with that. But All-Star Sunday, that's the main event they promote every single year. And especially over these past 2 to 3 years, they've been disasters. Can it be fixed?
I think it can be fixed, but it's going to come down to 3 main things. The first thing is the players have to buy in. I think that one of the most disrespectful things about this past All-Star weekend was it seemed like all the superstars kind of were already looking forward to next season's All-Star weekend. Like, it seemed like a lot of people were already in criticism mode with an idea for what could have been done better. Why was this not brought to the table when the conversations were being had for this All-Star game? It felt like we weren't even 24 hours removed from this All-Star weekend, and people already had comments on things that could be done differently for next year. Where did those ideas get lost in translation? For example, I know that we were talking about the dunk contest. We were talking about the dunk contest being relatively okay given Mac McClung's performance, but why was it that after All-Star weekend, the Ja Morants, the Giannis Antetokounmpos, the Zach LaVines go on Twitter and start having conversations around the idea of tapping in for the next dunk contest? Where was that when they could have faced Mac McClung to stop his three-peat? Why do you wait till he three-peats to then show interest in the possibility of doing so? And now we're going to hold your word to it, because once upon a time, LeBron James said he was going to, I think, prematurely declare himself for the All-Star dunk contest, that was the summer before he chose to go to Miami, and he didn't do it, and he never has done it. So now it's going to be interesting to see, now that we've seen those tweets from John Morant, Giannis, and Zach LaVine in particular, are they going to hold their end of the bargain as players that threw it out, that there would be a possibility of them playing. But the first thing is the buy-in. That's the first thing. The second thing has to be the structure. I don't care whether it's USA versus the world. I don't care if you're going to do the Four Nations thing that the NHL has been able to kind of establish a real strong following behind. But you have to establish a format that builds a real level of competitive edge. If there is no version of real competition, to the point that I've seen players feel more desperate at Rico Hines than what I've seen on an All-Star weekend, you're never going to get a strong product. If I see more effort put at a Black Ops run with Chris Brickley than I see in an All-Star game, you have to ask yourself, how far can this possibly go? So the formatting is going to have to also be a part of the buy-in. You have to establish a format that brings out a competitive edge in these players, similar to what we were able to get the first year of the Elam ending when Kobe Bryant passed. On God rest his soul, I don't know if everybody was just playing up to the hype of the fact that it was an inaugural moment for everything, but the hype around that was built behind the fact that players were playing with a certain level of competitiveness and a certain level of pride, dare I say, that made those games matter, made that weekend matter more than we've ever seen before. And then the third thing, and I think the most important thing, and I hate to be this guy because not many people are going to touch on this side of things, but the production value matters as well. And I think everybody is known for the longest, if you pay attention to the media side of basketball, but hasn't necessarily pointed it out very much. TNT is a very strong product, but they're carried even financially by the strength of what Inside the NBA has been able to do. And shout out to those guys.
I was going to say, there was a huge, and I mean a huge focus around them on that Sunday night.
Yeah, shout out to those guys as a team that has been very productive in being able to bring an entertainment value to the game of basketball while still bringing a certain level of analysis. Nothing necessarily high level, but something that gives you something in the middle of the game, before the game, and after the game, where there's a certain combination of entertainment and actually judging the product on the floor, right? But nonetheless, that was the carrying card of TNT as a production value.
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily the biggest budget team, and they're also not the biggest squad in terms of overall diversity as a media coverage squad for a weekend like All-Star Weekend, which is going to make NBC, I believe they're the ones who get it starting next year. They're the ones who get all the media right, or a majority of the media rights, if I'm not mistaken, next year, coming off of this most recent, TV rights agreement. It'll be interesting to see what a network like NBC with a much bigger budget and a much more significant media product value is able to do for a weekend that they clearly know needs real help but has real interest. I think we all want the All-Star Weekend to be good. I think we all want it to be good. Because the opposite end of it being good is not having it at all, right? Because it being bad tanks the value. So it's either it doesn't exist or it needs to be valuable, right? And I think NBC knows that there's a hole there. The question is going to be, can that production value bring another element to the table? Those first two things matter a lot, but production is a very underrated stage that we don't step to much when we talk about NBA media coverage and the NBA game being covered on a week-to-week basis, especially in a platform like this where the weekend pretty much takes all sports eyeballs for 3 days. There's a lot to do, but it can be fixed, TV. The NBA All-Star Weekend can be fixed, but it requires those three things: player buy-in, format construction, and stronger media production value to be able to put together a product that not only we actually care about, but the guys we watch for that weekend feel is worth giving that 3 days when they could be spending that time resetting for what's going to be a potential playoff push for most of those teams.
Man, I want to start with the production here because I agree with a lot of what you're saying here. One, I am not gonna buy into an All-Star game when you have Draymond Green and the rest of the TNT crew already shitting on it from the minute the broadcast starts. That's number one. I need these people, and we're gonna talk about it next week, Jay. We already went on a full rant about it last time, where I feel like the NBA is the only league where you see them constantly pushing people on the screen that that minimizes the game, that freaking that tear down the game, tear down its current format. How are we supposed to be bought in if you guys don't even believe it yourself? Have your criticism, sure. But already before the game even starts, you're already hating on it. That's the one thing I want to do, and I think that's why I'm happy. Kind of a breath of fresh air moving to NBC. Hopefully, new personalities actually focus on the game and just better production value. Because, like I mentioned, 40 minutes of game time versus almost 2.5 hours of just random stuff. The Mr. Beast shot. You have the freaking Inside the NBA tribute stuff. All that stuff. Less of that, more basketball. I think that's going to change. I think that will be fixed next year at NBC. I am hopeful for that. But Jay, I don't care the format. I don't care however they want to phrase this. USA versus World. They want to do the tournament system. Adam Silver loves this tournament. I don't care if it's freaking 4 nations like you mentioned. Effort is the number one thing. Effort. Effort, effort, effort. It doesn't matter. Because, people say, 20 years ago, people tried in the All-Star game, this and that. No, they didn't. What they did is they tried for at least the final 6 minutes if the game was close. These guys don't care if it gets close. Not at all. The thing is, this year, compared to previous years, it was actually better effort. It was better effort than previous years, which is not saying much, but it was better effort. But at the same time, the one year that you don't have, that you have effort, you don't have enough basketball on the court. So they need to find this balance where it's okay, we want to see the best players play on the court against each other. We want to make sure that we get to a point where there's a chance for it to be competitive. How do we do that? It starts with the players. It doesn't help that Kevin Durant's man, at this point, let's just scrap the All-Star game. Jokic saying, maybe this is I'd rather be having a break during this time. We need some sort of memo from Adam Silver, something along the line saying, guys, this needs to change. The whole mindset around All-Star Weekend needs to change. And it starts with the players. I think truly at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what format they have. But for them to have a successful All-Star game requires just some sort of level of effort from the players. Yes, they could continue to change it however they want to do it, however they see fit. I know people want to still go back to East and West, but last year that was an absolute disaster. There was a team that scored 214 points last year in last year's All-Star game. But what it really comes down to is the players. I think the production side of things will be fixed up once they move to NBC. But man, there needs to be some sort of just consistent effort, and it really just starts with the players' mentality on this game.
It's going to be really interesting because next year is such a valuable year. I think it's going to be a defining year overall for the All-Star weekend because they have to get this right sooner rather than later. The product on the floor for this weekend coming up in terms of next All-Star weekend, I mean, it really might be the determining factor as to whether or not we're able to keep the All-Star weekend for the foreseeable future. And I hate to put so much pressure on NBC in their first year, but I think it's one of those things where they have to kind of hit it out the park. Because if they don't, it's kind of like if they can't save them, who will kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, there's not too much you can point to necessarily save the weekend if the players aren't bought into it. Because you can't improve the product that much further beyond the overall, the actual production value. It's not going to make, you're not going to up the production value so all of a sudden the players start playing better. You can make the production value better so that it displays the basketball in a stronger light, but they still have to play valuable basketball for it to mean anything. So It's a tricky space to be in because at the end of the day, you're questioning guys' effort. And that's just A, a hard thing to gauge, but B, something that I feel like most importantly is just a position of a guessing game. It's gonna all come down to when and how these guys really go about it. at the end of the day, right?
Do you think like adding some sort of incentives, adding finals home court, some sort of thing like that, do you think that can be implemented, or is it kind of like a bit too far?
I think it's kind of hard to do so. Because I think at the end of the day, it's kind of a how does this apply to me kind of thing,
Yes.
right? Especially if you're one of those all stars, for example, like the Detroit Pistons got a first time All Star in Cade Cunningham, right? For example, only played 6 minutes, by the way. Absolutely atrocious. Very, very much sad for any of the first time All Stars that didn't get really real burn this All Star weekend. So that type of stuff sucks, right? But for example, a Cade Cunningham for the Detroit Pistons. Like, do we think the Detroit Pistons are real contenders? No.
No.
So if his team wins, what does that mean? Like,
True.
what does that mean? You know what I mean? So
yeah, no,
it's
right.
tricky because it's not the same as like the in-season tournament incentive where it's like guys across your roster win mad money, where even the guys that are 13th, 14th, 15th on the bench now just made life-changing money off of the backup players who also give a damn about them. But in the All-Star game, everybody got bread. So it's kind of like...
you can't even really incentivize that either,
Now, of course, you can do like, for example, when people were bringing up the 1v1s, you could do like, do it for charity, right? So there's a way to kind of work it through that.
Like a charity per player.
Charity per player. Yeah, that kind of incentive, right? But like how do you do that with the All-Star game when it's 20-something dudes? Not all of them are going to even play that much. And kind of given the landscape of how everybody usually is on that team, on those teams, everybody got money. You're not playing for the same camaraderie as you're playing for when you play in the in-season tournament for your 13th through 15th man.
Yeah. I think this is why, like, more than anything, like, it's not really about changing the format. It's about hopefully, like, the mentality switch in the players themselves. Like, putting it this way in the sense where this is a showcase for not just, your fans in general, but for the casual fan as well, to see the best players play on the court in order to, like, bring the product up. If they could say, like, you know what, for the NBA, if we like give it some sort of effort, like a certain like level of effort where we try and make this entertaining to the point where we can bring in new fans, we can help grow the sport. That's where mentality is needed here. Not just, man, I could be on my break right now and then make for the second like half playoff push. I think it's more than anything. This is why like you can't really like it doesn't matter what they change it to. It's all about the mentality that the players have in wanting to participate in this. And that just might just need like it's just a stern talk like from like Adam Silver, just to these teams, just to these players, and talk about how this All-Star game also is just like a way to help them improve improving the product in general, which is at the end of the day benefiting them. That's how they get all these TV deals. That's how they get all these like max contracts. At the end of the day, it's like kind of their duty to leave the game better than it was before that they came here. So I think like it's all about a mentality switch, but I just think that like it doesn't really matter how you change it up.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a couple of other like suggestions that you can make. Like, do you get professional dunkers for the dunk contest, given the fact that it seems like the All-Stars that you would want to see in it are very wishy-washy on whether or not they want to participate on a regular basis. There's the idea of instead of the the celebrity All-Star game where half the people you don't even know and the other half you know, but like, do you really want to see them play basketball? You replace them with like some of the All-Stars from Ice Cube's Big Three League. Like I think that's like an interesting concept that I kind of thought about in passing, right? Of having like former NBA players that, still play like at a high level given their ages and things of that nature, but that actually have real basketball acumen, right? Playing like a 5v5 setting or still maybe like in a 3v3 setting, but just like quarter by quarter you switch out and you get to see each of some of your favorite players from the Big Three leagues that which by the way the Big Three had real reception and was on Fox Sports consistently because people actually like were really interested in seeing some of the guys that participated, right? There's a couple of different tweaks you can make that don't all involve the NBA players specifically to help make the weekend better.
Yeah.
But it's kind of sad that you even need to turn to that level of alternative when at the end of the day, the product is around the NBA. So again,
and the best talent they have to offer.
yeah, I mean, it's a difficult situation because at the end of the day, you're playing with a set of rules that you can't necessarily dictate if you're Adam Silver. Like, you kind of are bent to the whim of the players and how much they care,
Yep.
because the product can be the product. Again, you can spruce it up all you want to, but better camera quality and different hosts isn't gonna make the actual on court play any better than it's been.
Yes, and less host is better because Kevin Hart was completely unbearable in this game. So like the less of that stuff, the better. The more effort from the players, the better. Guys, let us know what you guys think. Like, how can we fix this? I mean, if there's any fixing that can be done, like I mentioned, I'll say Saturday night. Maybe you change up the skills challenge a little bit. I personally, Jay, do you remember the shooting stars challenge from like when you were younger? The one where
Yeah,
it's like one.
that was the one current player, one WNBA player, and like an NBA legend,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I used to love that event. Why can't we bring that back? I
Yeah.
feel like that's honestly it's better than the skills challenge. The skills challenge is
I
kind of
guess
dead at this.
I guess Chris Bosh's team dominating just kind of turned everybody off. I don't know.
Honestly, I know Team Chris Bosh was crazy back in the day, but
Yeah.
honestly, I would say bring that if they could bring that back, great. Would love to see another iteration of the Steph versus Sabrina thing. I wish they brought it back this year, but they said that they maybe have something cooking for the WNBA All-Star weekend, so we'll have to wait for that one.
Yeah.
But in general, let us know what you guys think. What changes need to be made for this All-Star game to do well? Jay, before we move on, because we have some bold predictions to make, let's go into some other news that happened this week. One,
Okay.
the day of recording, WNBA legend Diana Taurasi, all-time leading scorer in WNBA history, Diana Taurasi, has retired from the game. I mentioned earlier, I thought, the Phoenix Mercury made all these moves. They potentially can convince Diana to stay another year. She ends up retiring. Of course, one of the best players in WNBA history, historic career. Your thoughts on her retirement?
Obviously shocking news given the fact that this team I felt like got really better over the offseason.
Yeah,
One of those things that it
yeah,
almost kind of felt like kind of similar to LeBron James getting Luka Doncic. You're like, wow, they might have just bought themselves another 2 years out of LeBron just by getting a player that's just so high level that it makes him feel like, kind of feel like he's still got a little bit left in the tank. It kind of
that
felt
juice, right?
similar
That
to
extra
that.
juice. Yeah,
Yeah, it felt like Diana Taurasi had the potential to get a little bit of that extra juice, like you said beforehand, by having obviously a Kalia Copper still on the roster, but bringing in Satu Sabali, bringing in a high level veteran point guard in Alyssa Thomas. And you kind of just wondered, like, if this would be a good chance at a last hurrah. You also have to ask yourself, how much of a contributor would she have been? Last year was a real slippage for her from a productivity standpoint. She was much more of a facilitator than we're used to, and she never was like an insane high level scorer. That's funny to say about the highest, the all time
yeah.
leading scorer in
I
the
know what you
entire
mean. Yeah,
league. But you know what I mean, from a diversity standpoint, she never was the most elite scorer from an ISO individual shot creation standpoint. But last year in particular was easily her least productive season ever, probably. And you have to wonder if she's just in that mode of like, if I'm going to be around and be on a WNBA floor for another season, I want to be a full-fledged contributor. I want to be a full impact player. And you have to wonder if maybe she just thought that she couldn't be that for this team. And I can't be mad at wanting to go out, not necessarily on
exactly.
top given the circumstances, but I can't be mad at you wanting to go out while you're still considered one of those top level players. Because it's one of those things where you live long enough to be the hero, live long enough as a hero that you eventually become the villain. I don't think Diana will ever become the villain in Phoenix, but it will be a point where you end up seeing her if she stays around too long, where you're talking more about her unproductive years than the ones where she was talked about as one of the top players in the sport.
Yeah, I mean, like LeBron said it in plenty of interviews, and this is like what you hear, kind of like some of like the all-time greats, some of the um top players say, where they don't want to let this game kill them. You know what I mean? Like, they don't want it to like drag on like until like literally the wheels fall off. They
Yeah.
want to become a contributor. They still want to play at their high level, and when they feel like there's that when they can't do that anymore, when they can't play at the highest level, you kind of have to call it quits. And I think that's what Diana did here, where she felt like, you know what, the grind isn't worth it anymore. Me trying to like I can't perform myself at the highest level, at least the level that I expect of myself. So now it's time to call her quits. And honestly, people saw that this could possibly be her last season. People saw it coming. No one is going to blame her. Yes, this Phoenix Mercury team would have a higher ceiling if they had a Diana Taurasi on that team, but we knew this is a possibility. I know she held it off for a pretty long time, but you can't hate her for having just such a storied career and wanting to go off on her own terms. So congratulations to her. Obviously, future WNBA Hall of Famer. Probably gonna be at some point like a double time Hall of Famer for like all of those USA teams that she's been a part of all those years. So she's gonna make the WNBA multiple times, the Basketball Hall of Fame. So yeah, congratulations to her. Again, storied career. Glad that she, again, once she got off on her own terms, that was great for her. Next topic that I want to quickly talk about, Jay, Wemby. Out of nowhere, after playing his, like, honestly, one of the few people who were trying their extreme hardest in that All-Star game, right after that, got called, was ruled out for the remainder of the season because of a blood clot in his right shoulder. They said they called it early because his like right arm wasn't feeling great for a few days, and now he's out for the season to kind of manage that. Your quick thoughts?
Yeah, definitely glad they caught it early. Let's remember the last couple of times we've heard blood clot, it's been tricky. Asura Thompson with the Detroit Pistons missed significant time last season, last season in terms of just like dealing with that in a real way. Remember one of the first times we really heard blood clot in recent memory where it kind of had a real significant hit was Chris Bosh had to retire much earlier than we expected.
Yeah, that was in his lung, I think, that time, right? It was in his lung.
Yeah, different positioning, so obviously that gives you a little bit of saving grace, but nonetheless, blood clot is one of those like shining terms now that like it's not you don't have a reoccurring theme of it in a way that like you talk about the ACL, you talk about torn Achilles, things where like we have real study cases. It doesn't have that kind of background, but I think because it doesn't have that kind of frequency to it, you have to be a little bit more purposeful about how you view those things because you just never know, man. We saw an NBA great step away from the game a little bit earlier than expected because of it. And Wemby is in like not even hit the prime of his career yet.
It's his second season. Yeah.
And we're talking about something that's not your most typical version of what would take a big man down, more specifically.
Yeah.
I think another thing that makes everything so scary is also that within the same weekend, or not within the same weekend, but within a week, Greg Popovich is also not going to be on the sideline for the rest of the season.
Yeah, with his future in question as well. So we don't know like what's going to happen past the season as well.
Yeah, so a lot of influx in the quarter of about a week and a half for the San Antonio Spurs, who I think a lot of people got really hype about after the NBA trade deadline, and deservedly so.
Yeah.
But now a team that I think we're just going to try to see how does De'Aaron Fox fit next to Stephon Castle. Get a better understanding of who the players they think are still, worth being a part of their overall core. And I think this is another year where maybe the San Antonio Spurs kind of inadvertently stealth tank, right? In a way where they're in a really good position. Not only do they have their own pick in 2025, they have Atlanta's pick in 2025. That's looking pretty sweet right now, given the fact that Jalen Johnson is out and they pretty much cleared house outside of, Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, and you still have like Onyeka Okongwu and things of that nature, right? But like for the most part, so far so good in terms of potentially having 2 picks in the lottery, or not potentially, having 2 picks potentially in the top 7.
Yeah.
Right? In a draft class that's not as lauded as it was maybe coming into the year, but a draft class nonetheless that still got really decent talent at the top for a Spurs team that, is still building, even if it feels like a team that's kind of fast-tracked a little bit by Wemby being so good. So, I mean, they have a chance to like stealth tank their way into kind of getting, 2 really good players in this upcoming draft class, along with having a significant amount of cap space to maybe make themselves a dangerous contender. So they took themselves out of contention to be like a scary like play-in team this year, I think, in my personal opinion. But quietly set up for a stronger 2025-2026 campaign. And you hate to talk about it that way, but I mean, you got to play the long game. You got to play the long game, and Wemby is obviously not just the future of your franchise, but I mean, many would say he's going to be, a future face of the league if he isn't already. So that's a guy you want to be very careful with. You want to play with kid gloves, even if the man is a walking 25-11 and 7 blocks for all you know. You know what I mean?
100%. I mean, it sucks that it, again happened this way. We've been seeing a lot this like happen more recently. I mean, you mentioned this Thompson. Remember, CJ McCollum? I think it was like last season or the season before. Also
Yeah,
had that, and
no.
he was out for like 2.5, 3 months as well.
Yeah.
Brandon Ingram had in the early 2020s as well, but that caused him to miss the rest of the season. This again, very precautionary with this Wemby stuff. Luckily, I mean, like I've heard like doctors' reports on it, basically saying that if it didn't get detected now, there was a chance that it was going to spread to other areas, like there it could like develop more blood clots everywhere else. So it's great that they caught this now. So hopefully they can just, you know, do whatever procedures they need to do to make sure that this doesn't really happen again, and like this doesn't like affect Wemby for the remainder of his career. So that's good for that's good. At least they got it now. Popovich, hopefully that he's doing okay. At this point, I think we speak for all basketball fans, whether he returns to the sideline or not. We just care about Popovich's health. We thought that, like, I mean, he's already inducted to the Hall of Fame, even as an active coach. So seeing all this transpire, him trying to like take it back on the court, we just want to see the best for Pop, and hopefully that he makes whatever best decision is great for him and his family. And yeah, hopefully, like, yeah, this whole Spurs thing now going on. Yes, it takes him out of playoff contention, but like you mentioned, they can get lucky in the draft lottery once again. Let's see if the odds go their way. They might be slowly building one of the best young cores in basketball. I think if they like somehow luck out in the lottery here somehow, they can be like up there with the Oklahoma City Thunder in terms of like having some of the best young cores out there. But yeah, let us know what you guys think of these two news about these two news stories. Jay, we're gonna end off this show with something that we do every single year after the trade deadline, which is the post trade deadline bold predictions. We're gonna go back and forth. We might do one, we might do two. Let's see how it goes. But we're gonna try to make some bold predictions for the remainder of the season to see how the remainder of the season goes. If you remember from past seasons, we created these whole storylines trying to figure out how the NBA season is gonna go, and we created some fun moments. Let's see if this happens here. Jay, I'm gonna throw it over to you. What is one bold prediction you have for the remainder of the season?
My bold prediction is actually going to build off of my original bold prediction from the preseason TV, and it's related to the good old Detroit Pistons. If you remember in the preseason, I said that my theme of this year builds off of what I've been preaching for the last 3 years, is that competency breeds prowess on the basketball floor. So far, the Detroit Pistons are slotted at the 6th spot in the Eastern Conference. I made the bold prediction in the preseason that I believe that not only would the Detroit Pistons make the play-in tournament, I believe that they had the upside to be at the top half of that 7 through 10, excuse me. I'm going to go even bolder than that, and I'm going to say that I believe the Detroit Pistons secure a top 6 space in the Eastern Conference layout. I think that they are going to stay probably at 6, but I think that they are going to make the playoffs definitively rather than being a team that has to go through the play-in tournament in order to potentially make the postseason. I think Detroit is going to pencil themselves in as one of the guaranteed 6 Eastern Conference playoff squads come the end of the regular season.
Wow, so you don't even think they're going to be in the play tournament? You think they're going to be a guaranteed top 6 seed? Interesting.
Guaranteed top 6.
All right, that's an interesting one, especially because yes, they've been playing really well, but they haven't been doing this without Jay and Ivy. So the fact that they're still playing this well, Kate is playing like, dare I say, a top 5 point guard this year so far. Like he's been really damn good. So if there's a chance that can happen, it's probably going to be this year. They're 32 and 26 right now. You know what? They're 4.5 games ahead. Sorry, 3.5 games ahead. They're probably gonna do it, Jay. I'm probably with you with that prediction. Jay, my bold prediction. Oh, Philly, it's gonna get worse for you guys. It's gonna get worse. So you already know what's going on right now, right, Jay? With Joel Embiid, the 76ers trying to figure out what's the next plan of action for the remainder of the season.
Yeah.
Jay, I think this is gonna blow up in their face. What's gonna happen is they're gonna get the imaging. I think that there's going to be some disagreement on both sides, whether Joel Embiid thinks he's getting surgery, whether the 76ers think it's going to be worth it. There's going to be some things about, the contract, we have this and this. It's going to get messy, Jay. And I say, before the end of the season, we will get a public trade request from Joel Embiid. A public trade request. I think this has been a messy season. I think that this stuff is gonna get more messy when it comes to the imaging and how both sides think that they should handle this injury going forward, especially in terms of the money might become an issue at some point. Jay, I think it's I do think it might like request a Joel Embiid trade request.
I think it's interesting that you say that because the actual request does not surprise me. I think the interesting question will be his value on the market itself. That will be the interesting factor. As of right now, if you were just going simply based off the standings, the Philadelphia 76ers would be eligible for the 7th pick in the NBA draft.
Yeah, 7th best odds. Yeah.
Yeah, 7th best odds as of right now. A team that clearly is free falling in a way where they're becoming more and more dysfunctional by the day. Paul George is quoted for saying that this team does not have championship or contender DNA. He's part of that problem, but that's a different podcast. A team that feels like they went from having like one of the greatest off seasons we've seen from a masterclass perspective of building your roster around your strengths to just having a season from hell.
This has been a nightmare in all sense of the word.
But you have to wonder, you have to ask yourself, how do they dig themselves out of this hole? Because Joel Embiid requesting a trade, in a sense, might be your first lead to solving that problem. But I would also say that given his injury history, also including what he's dealing with at the moment, the trade value can't possibly be what you would normally expect for a player this good when healthy, right? I mean, we're creeping into some pretty dangerous territory when having a conversation about Joel Embiid's value. And when you take certain teams like the New York Knicks, he's been rumored to for the longest, off of the table given the Karl Anthony Towns acquisition, I'm not saying that he'll have no market, but at what price?
I think there's no market for Joel Embiid at this point.
I agree.
Mostly because Jay, he just re-signed this man to a new contract.
I know.
He just re-signed him to a 3-year, almost $200 million deal. Who would risk that? Who was going to risk trading for that? This is why I think, like, Jay, this is, like, not even the start of things getting super messy for the 76ers. It's going to get worse. Remember, they signed Paul George to a 4-year deal as well. All of these moves, they're just piling upon each other. The fact that Nick Nurse cannot get anything out of this team. And they just continue getting injured. They cannot find a flow at all. And they have a former MVP. Now, they're thinking of breaking his hip so that this part can, like, realign with the rest of his body. They're going to be jumping through freaking hoops to try and get this guy healthy. It's going to get messy, Jay. And I think there's going to be I don't know if it's going to be a trade request, but he's going to ask out. There's going to be at some point where it's like, this has become just too much of a mess for him.
I think we've all kind of seen that the process was processing for a little too long. And there has to be a point where, like, the straw breaks the camel's back, for lack of a better analogy. Like, there has to be a point where wrong thing after wrong thing after wrong thing happens. The Sixers in particular have had a handful of the quote-unquote best case scenario kind of roster constructions, playoff implications. Like, we've seen too many versions of the Sixers where even when they got it right, they didn't get it done. Unfortunately, I think they stacked up those circumstances to a point where eventually the Jenga tower got to come down. Eventually, it got to come down. And unfortunately for them, they're bent to the will of that Jenga tower being on the back of... We talk about Anthony Davis, but we got to really point at Joel Embiid for a second and really ask ourselves, man, who really is the most brittle player in the NBA? Because Joel Embiid, Joel Embiid is in
Zion.
real contention.
Yeah.
It's between Joel Embiid and Zion Williamson for the most brittle player in the NBA. Because I'm not going to lie, Joel Embiid might have a worse injury rap sheet then my favorite quarterback of all time in the NFL, Ben Roethlisberger. And if anybody knows, Ben Roethlisberger used to have a graphic pop up when he would come back from injury that would show all of his built up injuries over the course of a couple of seasons. They used to give the little like body diagram and point to different parts of his body and show how banged up he was. Joel Embiid would look like you're giving him like pin needle surgery if you were trying to put an arrow next to every injury he's accrued since being drafted. Mind you, he came into the league injured and missed his entire first season.
Mm-hmm.
So, with Joel Embiid being arguably, in my opinion, the most brittle player in the NBA, to have him as also being your franchise dictator for when and how you're able to rebuild, not only when you choose to rebuild, but if you were to trade him, how effective could you start that rebuild?
Mm-hmm.
Philly might be right there behind Phoenix for the worst possible future in terms of what their roster is going to look like in 2028, for example. This is a team that is not set up for longevity by any means. And I think they knew that, but I don't think they saw these troubles coming as soon as they have. Which I don't know how you couldn't given the superstars you have, but I digress.
We were talking about how they had the best season, the offseason by far out of any team, and then it's become a freaking disaster. Honestly, I'd be more scared if Tyrese Maxey wants out because he's like your only saving grace going forward with the future of this team. If you have no Tyrese Maxey, then oh boy, then this becomes even more of a freaking mess. But yeah, we're gonna leave it at those bold predictions. Let us know what you guys think down below. If you have any bold predictions for the remainder of the season, we might even like have some more in the future. Who knows? But man, the Joel Embiid situation, and now the Pistons are freaking gonna be in the freaking playoffs. What a freaking season we're having right now in the NBA. It's been absolutely fantastic. And Jay, we've reached another end of a fantastic episode. Thank you guys for watching. What do you have to tell these beautiful people before we have to sign out?
Man, the reset is back on. Obviously, we got a good week and a half to kind of get things together and kind of recalibrate for what we want for the podcast, pushing towards the postseason. We are in playoff mode just as much as a lot of the NBA teams across the league are prepping themselves for the bigger moments. So we're in a set right now where we're really just trying to get into a groove. Expect the series to start at the beginning of March. I am working on something where I want to start to bring more nuance to the game in terms of celebrating the players that are playing at a high level of the next generation. So I know a lot of people love talking about the Kevin Durant's, the LeBron James, Luka Doncic. Everybody likes talking about the guys who are already established and that we already view as top 15, top 25 players in the league. But what about some of the guys on the come up? Obviously, I'll have a couple of guys featured that are of the younger generation that are already cementing themselves as top 5 and top 10 players in the league. But I also want to mention a couple of guys that are going to be on that list that will be on their way. Maybe not as a top 25 player, but as a role player that you're going to want on your team if your team is in championship contention, or as a secondary option next to your favorite player, right? Those type of guys intrigue me. I'm very much interested in seeing dudes who are able to fit a role, whether that's a tertiary role, working as a secondary option, a primary option, being an off-ball threat as a shooter, being one of your best defenders on a team that desperately needs an identity. Like, I want to be able to focus on the nuances of watching the next generation build their identity, because I think we've become so accustomed to the superstar guys that we've seen for the last 10 years carrying the product, and there's going to be a point where we tell them bye, and we have to be able to look forward to the next generation of people who are going to be showing us how to win a championship, showing us how to fit on championship rosters. So I'm looking to get into that in a real way at the beginning of March. On top of that stuff, obviously expect the podcast to continue to keep like churning out content. As we get closer to the postseason, there'll be more episodes per week because we're going to be locking in on this stuff even more, because once the postseason starts, half the league is out the mix. Right? So we want to be able to get to those teams that aren't going to be in play as much as we possibly can before we don't see them for 2 to 3 months, right? So there's going to be a lot of content to go around, whether it's on the podcast or on the TikTok / any of the social medias in short form. Very excited about this series coming up because it gives me a chance to really like dive into the numbers and talk about some guys that I feel like are maybe not undervalued, but definitely under discussed. So I'm looking forward to it, TV. I think we're in a really good space right now. I think the reset has worked relatively well for us. It's now just about putting the product on the floor, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
100%, man. There's going to be a lot of episodes coming out. Of course, check out the clips, all that other stuff. We're going to have a bunch of content coming from the Hit Your Free Throws page as well. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you guys for all the support. Continue to support the Hit Your Free Throws podcast through all the links below. Jay and I will also be back next week for a new episode where we're going to have a topic calling out not just the players on the court, man. There's going to be a big episode next week. And yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day. This is TV. This is Jay. We're signing out. Peace.